Hello, Dr. Richter here. Today I'm going to talk about cholesterol and basically what it means for the body, and that there is only one cholesterol and it is not dangerous. And it's actually the second most important fat in the body. And you will understand all of that today, and that the blood work that is normally scaring you is really not very meaningful. And yeah, let's dive right into it. So, again, cholesterol after omega-3 is the most important fat in the body. It's not really a fat, but that's besides the point. And that cholesterol is not a disease. So, when you are told by your doctor you have high cholesterol, that doesn't mean anything because, again, cholesterol is not a disease. Heart disease and stroke is a disease. So that's why your doctor wants to prescribe statins to you. However, the effectiveness of statins is very, very low. They do not reduce your risk of heart attack and stroke. And that is basically the gist of the whole point here, is that lowering cholesterol, which statins do, is not really achieving anything. Only omega-3 balance is achieving anything. So let's move on. And we are basically in this situation now where everybody tests at 2% omega-3 with a very, very low level of EPA, 0.3%. And only when you get to 8%, you are in the safe zone and can avoid the risk for heart disease and stroke. So we have been in this range now for the past 20, 30 years due to the high intake of omega-6. And now we removed all omega-3 from our diet. So only when you supplement with a very high non-rancid omega-3, you can now achieve 8%, and your body will kick out the inflammatory omega-6. So these studies are old. They are very, very old, and we've known this for 70 years now. When you basically reach 7, 8% omega-3, your risk of heart disease goes to zero. And that is the true root cause of heart disease. It has to do with the immune system and its chronic inflammatory state now. So this number of 8% is generally accepted by hundreds of studies, and it is not a arbitrary number. It's a very, very solid number. Yet nobody is there. And actually, if you do take an omega-3 test with a standard company, LabCorp Quest, it will obviously correlate our test results done by Vitas Labs in Norway and have the same numbers. However, they will put 2% into the green, which is not true. You can see that these are just divisions of populations, not even supplementations. So you simply look at quartiles of the population, and that 3%, which nobody really tests at, most people test below 2.5% now, is your 100% risk. And only at 8%, it goes to zero. So again, this is not new. This has been known for 20, 30, 40, even 50 years now, since the 70s when we analyzed the Eskimos and other indigenous tribes and their status of omega-3. So that is why omega-3 is so famous. So if you want to avoid the zipper, you basically need to get to 8% omega-3 and not avoid cholesterol. So let's dive into cholesterol. You can see that it is not a fat. This is fat triglycerides, basically three fatty acid chains, and some of them are unsaturated. That's what these double lines here mean, double bonds. Omega-3 means that the last third of the carbon is unsaturated. So this oxidizes very quickly. It's very susceptible to rancidity. That's why you have to protect your omega-3 in your supplement and in your body. So triglycerides basically are a measure of your metabolic syndrome state, diabetes, and heart disease. And we can lower triglycerides now with our omega-3 to very, very low levels. So, the world of fats basically consists of fatty acids, triglycerides combined, and then you combine that with a few more groups and make up membrane molecules. And cholesterol is totally different. It's a sterol, but for the sake of including it into this world of fat, it is usually called a lipid panel, even though sterols are not a lipid. So cholesterol is extremely important for the cell membrane, which I will get to. And it is very important to make many other compounds in the body, including vitamin D and bile acids to even digest your fat and your omega-3. And of course, it makes all the steroid hormones, testosterone and estrogen and so on. Most importantly, though, it is important to have cholesterol to have a fluid and stable membrane. And that basically looks like this. So the cholesterol is a small molecule inserted into your bilayer, and it interacts with the lipid that actually forms your membrane in the cell. And it even interacts with all the proteins that are inserted into this membrane channels, nerve channels, everything, receptors, and of course, our mitochondrial ATPase that is responsible for giving us energy. So this molecule is relatively small and it inserts, and it does two very important things. It keeps the membrane stiff at higher temperatures so we can endure 45 degrees Celsius states without having a breakdown of our cells. And we can endure minus 45 Celsius states without our membranes freezing. So it's a very cool little molecule that keeps our membranes happy. And that's why it is probably most likely the second most important fat. So how much cholesterol do we have in our body and how can it possibly be bad? Question mark. So you can analyze a very simple math here, and up to 30% of the dry membrane lipid mass in our cells is cholesterol. That comes to a staggering 600 grams of dry weight in your body. Given the fact that you're 60% water, that is an enormous amount of cholesterol in your body. So how can that possibly be a bad thing? You are always just told you have 2 milligrams, whatever, floating in your blood. That has nothing to do with anything. You need cholesterol and you need lots and lots of it. If you do not eat cholesterol, if you do not eat animal products, you have to make it. Your liver has to use enormous amounts of energy to make cholesterol, and that is what the statins are blocking. So you do never want to block that reaction in your liver. Yeah, you can see here different tissues contain different amounts, and obviously, muscles and brain have the highest amounts. Every tissue requires a very large amount of cholesterol. So, heart disease is definitely not related to cholesterol. Again, there's only one cholesterol molecule. There is no good or bad. There's different vesicles moving it around in the body that move cholesterol to the peripheral cells and then back to the liver. And that's all there's to it. If you have arteriosclerosis and a plaque in your heart and you find cholesterol in that, that is complete coincidence because your body requires such a large amount of cholesterol. So all these different vesicles have different purposes and they have different markers on them, but that has literally nothing to do with the actual disease. It's a complete coincidence and it's a fabrication by the pharmaceutical industry to confuse you and to put certain ideas in your head that there is a good and bad cholesterol. No, there isn't. There's only one cholesterol molecule. So, in short, the liver pumps out cholesterol faster than it can be cleared because the receptors are not always working, especially when you have insulin resistance or metabolic syndrome. And that's why some of these vesicles are piling up. The return of the vesicles is not working properly. And so they use that as a marker, but there is not no causality here. So historic error, right? So correlation and causation. So that's why I'm saying it's complete coincidence. So you have high LDLs if you have metabolic syndrome, and you have high LDLs in heart attack patients, but that doesn't mean anything. It's again, not a marker. There are predictive markers that those are on the surface of these vesicles, and you can count them, but that's not really normally done. The most predictive marker is triglyceride, and it is high for most people, so they just throw up their arms and don't know what to do with that. Of course, there are lots of inflammatory markers you can measure that have nothing to do with these lipid panels, and you can even measure antibodies and other ways of predicting a heart attack, but that is not normally done. So, cholesterol is just basically the smoke and not the fire. You can kind of look at it like that. Here, do you see the exact data that is ignored by the pharmaceutical industry? A cholesterol level of about 220 is ideal, and they call that high. So obviously, when your cholesterol goes up to 300, your mortality goes up because you have other problems. But the most important thing to understand here is that when it is below 200, into the 140 levels, where they want you to be, your mortality actually goes up by 2.5 times. And this does not mean uh, there's no difference between age groups, and obviously there's slight differences between genders here, but you can see that the lowest mortality is 220. And if you plug this into ChatGPT, ask him what is ideal cholesterol, he will not believe it at first. I've actually sent him this data and he reversed it because he thinks the narrative tells him the opposite. I had to actually remind ChatGPT what he was looking at, and then he agreed with me. So you plug this cholesterol blood work into ChatGPT, it will just regurgitate the narrative. It will not really analyze the data. That's what I am telling you. Again, lowest mortality is 210 to 250. So you need very high levels of floating cholesterol in your blood. You can plot again quarters of omega-3 in your membranes. Some people will have a high cholesterol, I'm sorry, a high omega-3 content, and some will have a very low, as I've shown you before. Most people test at 2.5 now. This is about 3%, and then this is at 6.5. So now you see that all the relative risks for heart attack basically follow omega-3. So you have the lowest risk of heart attack at a very high level of omega-3. And all the other markers don't really matter. LDL, HDL, total cholesterol, even the CRP inflammatory marker follows omega-3. Even homocysteine follows omega-3. So here's your proof that there's no correlation between cholesterol and heart disease. It is omega-3 that is the decisive factor here. And again, this is all published. You can look up these articles, and these numbers are basically not made up. You have to get to 8% to be safe. You can see that in these graphs. So the real reason for the increase of triglycerides, I told you before, triglycerides is the measure of metabolic syndrome, is the high intake of inflammatory omega-6 and coming from soybean and other seed oils. And that all jumped tremendously in the 60s when we were told, or my parents were told, to stop eating fatty red meats. So saturated fat is no longer safe, even though we grew up on it for 200,000 years. And you should eat margarine and Crisco instead. And so that's basically what you see here. Consumption of saturated fat went way down and omega-6 went up. And with the same time, you have an increased risk of high triglycerides. And that is metabolic syndrome in its definition. And here you can see the best graph, sugar normalized. Diabetes is not related to sugar. Again, sugar normalized means that you take that out of the equation, and you can clearly see how the diabetes goes along with omega-6 and the reduction of saturated fat. Sugar is not the cause for it. Of course, we are consuming slightly more sugar now than we did 100 years ago, but that is again normalized into this graph, and you can see the real cause is inflammatory omega-6. So fatty acids lower triglycerides only if you have a large amount of omega-3 as opposed to 6. You're testing 30 to 1 inflammatory. That is not lowering your triglycerides, but if you do get there, some people get there, once you are supplementing non-rancid, you are basically in a state where you should measure with very low triglycerides. And, the data shows, all the studies show that basically high omega-3 EPA, DHA lower your triglycerides by 50%. And that is basically done throughout the body, and it will also normalize your different cholesterol vesicles and all of that discussion around good and bad cholesterol, which again is a fabrication. There's only one cholesterol, will go away. So this all can be explained biochemically. I have two other talks on this through this receptor that gets activated by omega-3. And of course, its anti-inflammatory effects, and that in turn improves insulin sensitivity, which then in turn will improve your triglycerides. So we measure all of this, of course, with our balance test, and that's why we are famous. We have a test-based company, and your second test will show that you can get to 8% omega-3. So please stop chasing a cat's tail and working on a 30 to 1 omega-6 to 3 inflammatory index, but instead measure where you should be. There is a solution to the problem. Once you ingest non-rancid omega-3 at high levels, you will kick out the inflammatory omega-6. And that's what our second test proves. And I hope I explained everything to you today, that you can simply discard the topic of cholesterol, pay attention to triglycerides and other inflammatory markers. They will all follow omega-3. Thank you very much.